Hi there, my name is Dan, and welcome back to All One, the United Anatomy of Being. This is episode 29, called Where Are We? An Educated Suggestion, and this is the third in 3 episodes where we are exploring, trying to demonstrate and gain some understanding of where the human species is in this natural arcing trajectory of physical level motion and existence. So first, it would be extremely difficult to deny that the human species is well into the mind level and the summer of our existence. But where exactly? An argument could certainly be made that the earliest form of humans, or pre-modern humans, or even pre-humans, entered the mind level upon the first use of tools roughly 2 to 3 million years ago. But tool use, at least in its simplest form, can also be considered part of the physical level development and part of our species spring, just like a modern baby or child develops the skills for both tool use and even early development of the mind well before completing their spring season and preparing for self-sufficiency. This question also gets slightly more complicated depending on how we define our species and the evolution or gradual process of life toward the modern human or Homo sapiens. So let's just define a few terms. Science refers to early humans, or sometimes considered pre-humans, or certainly the pre-modern human, as hominids. And they refer to the modern human, as we know it today, as Homo sapiens. Theories on when the first hominids appeared on Earth vary, but there are fossil records dating back 6 million years. There are also varying theories on when the first Homo sapiens appeared on Earth, but fossil evidence indicates it is roughly 300,000 years ago. Now, clearly, tools were being used well before the existence of the modern human, meaning the modern human, or Homo sapiens, almost certainly used tools from the very beginning of existence. There was also much physical development by the early modern human in terms of learning how to survive and exist in new ways, including surviving, or I should say maybe an outcome, is surviving the eventual extinction of other hominid species like the Neanderthal, and the eventual migration across the globe due, again, to this continual development of both the body and early development of the mind levels for our species. So, to reiterate scientific theories and evidence, the Homo sapien species is approximately 300,000 years old based on fossil records. Tool use was already well in place at the beginning of the species, meaning that Homo sapiens used tools from the very beginning. There is also evidence of first early cave art approximately 50,000 years ago, and then the physical dominance of our species occurred with global migration and extinction of all other hominids approximately 25,000 years ago. So what does this mean in answering the question of where are we now? It still means we are well into the mind level or the summer of our species, but exactly where, no one really knows for sure. But we also know that an immense leap forward in the development of the mind and the mental level of our species occurred with the development of plant cultivation and agriculture. Now, animal domestication, there are theories that this occurred slightly before agriculture for some animal species and slightly after for other animal species. And it was certainly a mental level development. However, it did not have the same effect on the future development of the mind, or the human mind, as agriculture, because agriculture initiated a major shift from nomadic to sedentary lifestyles. and we're going to talk about this in more detail later. But to reiterate once again, no one knows exactly where the human being is now as a species. Exact timelines of the evolutionary process are not clear. Knowledge transmission of first developments like art, animal domestication, or even agriculture to critical mass populations are not clear. And of course, new evidence is constantly being discovered. But to put where we are into some plausible context, here are 3 suggestions. In this first scenario, we can examine the most fundamental first that we know to date that could be the delineations of our seasons as a species. As the very first evidence of Homo sapiens' physical existence was approximately 300,000 years ago, and again, as we know to date, it would make sense that 300,000 years ago would be the creation or the beginning of the spring season for our species. The next major milestone would certainly set humans solidly into the mind level or summer season would be the development of agriculture. And for quite a long time, the earliest evidence and estimations of the start of human plant cultivation was about 10,000 years ago. However, more recent scientific evidence suggests that the very first plant cultivation could have been as early as 23 to 25,000 years ago. If the very first plant cultivation could be considered the human transition from the spring of our species to the summer of our species, or the transition and foray from primarily physical level beings to primarily mental level beings, then as this graphic shows, we're likely still 250,000 years from the apex of our journey. This would mean we have only barely separated and have an extremely long way to go before we move into the heart level and can potentially enjoy the beauty of autumn as a species. And given what we know about human individualism and what, for example, that has done to our planet, it might be entirely depressing if this scenario were true. But there are also more recent and contemporary developments and evidence of growing consciousness, particularly regarding love, collaboration, and human equality, that I think suggests this scenario is far from correct. So a second possibility would be to consider that while Homo sapiens were anatomically different than previous hominids and had the capacity for greater mental capability, they were really not much different from other hominids like Neanderthals for quite some time, or at least didn't live much differently than other hominids like Neanderthals for quite some time. They likely had greater skills, which increased their probability of survival, but Homo sapiens and other hominids like Neanderthals lived simultaneously for about 250 to 275,000 years. So defining, or really a defining difference or development must be considered that may have marked the accelerated evolution of Homo sapiens in order to clearly differentiate them from earlier hominids and mark a beginning where we can then begin to understand more clearly where we are. One possibility is the development of art, and evidence exists that Homo sapiens began making cave art around 50,000 years ago. So if Homo sapiens first developed art 50,000 years ago and first developed plant cultivation approximately, let's say, 23,000 years ago, then we are much closer to the apex of our journey, and therefore much closer toward expanding into greater heart consciousness as a species and entering the autumn phase of our existence. This scenario might also be less likely, or a less accurate delineation, because there is now evidence, and likely very strong evidence and theories that Neanderthals may have made, and really very likely made, the first known cave drawings, as rudimentary as they were. So a third possibility is to examine not the major firsts of our species, but more critical mass events that once again highly differentiated us from all other living species. In this scenario, it could be considered that the beginning of the spring season for our species, for Homo sapiens, was the global migration of the species and the simultaneous extinction of all other hominids, thereby leaving us as the undeniable dominant species on the planet. This event left Homo sapiens populated around most of the Earth without competition from other hominids. And if we are not considering complete known firsts for our species, but rather more critical mass timelines, then it could also be considered that the transition of humans from physical level beings to mind level beings was not the time of the first possible plant cultivation of 23 to 25,000 years ago, but the beginning of more critical mass agriculture and sedentary lifestyles of approximately 10 to 12,000 years ago. In this scenario, we are again much closer to the apex of our journey as a species, and therefore much more optimistically closer to an expansion into greater heart consciousness as a species, unity, and the beginning of the autumn phase of our existence. Of course, there are many ways to hypothesize the unknown of where exactly we are in our journey. But regardless, the perspective or plausibility, we are undoubtedly in the sum of our species. We are in the hard-working and difficult time of continued separation, but have not yet attained the apex of our journey or entered the autumn or the heart level as a species. We are still nearing our greatest separation, which is natural, again, but also dangerous if we do not have the consciousness or awareness that we cannot separate indefinitely. For many seemingly centuries now, but even more so for many, many decades now, human beings are in a phase of extreme individualism. And evidence around the globe indicates that humans are very much divided. Again, this is natural in this separating phase and specifically so as we get closer and closer to that apex. But we are also likely very nearing this apex, and human beings must, like everything in physical existence, eventually begin to fall, or better said, begin the dissension toward union and reunion. That is the only way we will benefit as a species from the beautiful giving and receiving phase of autumn, and benefit from this required work of separation, taking, growth and development of our species' spring and summer seasons. While we are currently in a state of individuality, continued separation and a lack of unity as members of this species and members of this planet, unfortunately, but naturally, we will undoubtedly experience further separation before we reach the apex of our natural journey. And there are a few other important points to make on this topic, because we actually might be much, much closer to our apex than many people might think. First, the delineation of phases within a cycle are far from linear and 100% equal. Second, the individuals within a species all evolve or traverse their own individual growth cycles at slightly different rates, meaning the aggregate trajectory or rate of the species journey through these cycles can really change at any time. Third, there are also environmental or circumstantial events that can affect or alter this uncertain journey between physical creation and physical dissolution or end. Meaning, the trajectory or rate of the journey of a species can also change as similarly as it can for an individual within it. Finally, the change from phase to phase or season to season is never a light switch with a finite point of delineation. Again, because there are so many individual cycles within the cycles of the species, and those growth cycles all develop at different rates of change, the shift from season to season is much more like a dimmer switch with a waning and waxing from phase to phase. So just like our breath that was already explained, or just like the tides, or just as there is light before the sunrise and there is still light after the sunset, change from season to season is gradual. Now, it might not be easy to envision our current state as a species, or more importantly, imagine the possibility for the changing direction we should soon be naturally taking, particularly when we see the undeniable individualism, separation, and lack of unity, and all its effects such as greed, war, inequality of wealth and power, all of which have existed for millenniums and millenniums. But it might be less difficult to imagine the possibility for the changing direction we should soon be naturally taking, given the recent negative effects from our past separating actions like global pollution, deforestation, over-harvesting of resources, unintended consequences from technological advances, or the aggregate of many of these effects, which humans now seriously face in the form of climate change. Many of these effects result from taking and the individual fights for survival. But the separation, once again, is rather natural. What is unnatural, and will certainly lead to disaster for the human species, is thinking that we can continue to grow and separate forever. Because nothing grows forever. Nothing physical grows forever. While everything in physical existence had to separate to develop and evolve, everything must also unite and return to its source. And as an old religious phrase goes to explain this natural journey, which cannot be changed regardless of the desires of some or even all humans, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. What we cannot do if we wish to survive or wish to avoid a very hard fall is continue on a separated and individual trajectory beyond what is natural. Again, regardless of where we are right now as a species, there are always conditional or circumstantial events that can always accelerate or even decelerate where we are on this natural arcing journey, and thus accelerate or decelerate the requirement for our own change as a species. Particularly since the Industrial Revolution, the human effect on air, water, biodiversity, species extinction, nature, and the planet in general has resulted in a scientifically proven climate problem that will cause a premature fall for our species if we do not change our seemingly unnatural trajectory. Similarly, while every species has a subconscious or unconscious desire for survival of the species through reproduction, another contemporary problem of human overpopulation really should lead to a subconscious, unconscious, and hopefully conscious need for decreased reproduction required for the species' survival. As an example, if every adult couple that desired children only had a maximum of 2 offspring, 2 children, the global population would very quickly stabilize and even decrease rather than continue to grow, because not every adult wishes to have children. The inability or unwillingness to change may not lead to the complete fall or dissolution of our entire species. However, if we stray too far off the natural course of physical level motion, uncorrected for too long, we will devastatingly fall as nature corrects the course for us. And while we may have begun to stray decades or even a few centuries ago, we cannot continue to do this if we wish to survive en masse. So this graphic here, we cannot do this, or we will take a hard fall, because we must, one way or another, either stay on this course or have an accelerated return to union that actually is probably correlated to how far off of this course we get. But if we are smart enough, conscious enough, and perhaps lucky enough, both as a species and the aggregate of billions of human individuals, we will reach our apex and begin a natural descent toward union and reunion before we fall sharply and unnaturally, which, again, as we certainly happens to many life forms for various reasons, both individually and as a species. And if we are smart enough, conscious enough, and perhaps lucky enough, we will enter the heart level, or the autumn, in critical mass as a species and experience the wonderful benefits, including decreasing separation, growing unity, and all the, again, glorious benefits, beauty, and joy that come with it. While it may not be easy to foresee that we naturally must change, or that change on the physical level is constant, or even to imagine that we can change as a species, the natural trajectory of motion on the physical level should provide the hopefulness of what is coming and that change is possible. Nature is in our favor, and the time is now. All that is required of us as a species to successfully reach our apex and then gracefully transition from a separating trajectory to a uniting trajectory and all its glorious benefits is consciousness or awareness. Because that is where we are naturally heading, naturally but uncertainly heading. So hopefully this provides some picture or understanding of where we are as a species. And in the next episode, I'm going to start to explore and describe how we got here. So thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.